Today I'm going to talk to you about Sweden versus the USA from the perspective of a Swede living in the USA. For those of you that don't know, I am a Swedish American, born to a Swedish father and an American mother. I've lived in both countries respectively for about half my life. I'm going to structure this talk into pros and cons, and I'm going to start with the pros first. The big advantage living in the United States from a Swedish perspective is the American attitude. Just in general, the atmosphere in the United States is significantly better than it is in Sweden. It's a lot more lighthearted and it's significantly more encouraging. In Sweden, you are going to get doubted and questioned regarding anything that you want to do with your life significantly more than you do in the United States. That makes a big difference to most Swedes. The second advantage to living in the United States for a Swedish person is the fact that they are the key to the American lock. They very oftentimes succeed in the United States and do very well here simply because they're everything that Americans need and aren't themselves. They're very well educated, they're very process oriented, and they have, generally speaking, a lot less pride in regards to certain things that tend to hold Americans back. And speaking of doing very well in the United States, one of the things that motivates Swedes to do so well is the fact that they're rewarded for their hard work. That's something that you are not in Sweden to nearly the extent that you are here in the United States. I oftentimes bring this up with my friends and family, but I was paying something in the range of like 56% income tax in Sweden. And I know that oftentimes you'll say, well, you get a lot for it in the Scandinavian countries, but it still doesn't add up. And the fact that you get to choose what to do with the money you make, and you get a nice fat paycheck at the end of the month, at the end of the pay period, really makes a difference to your self-confidence and just your feeling of self-worth and that you're on the right path in life. Another big pro regarding the United States for Swedes is the fact that Americans don't care. Americans care significantly less about how you look, what you're wearing, how you do things and what you're doing than Swedes do. And it's like a breath of fresh air. Americans just don't really care. And that's something that Swedes experience here in the United States as like a big relief. And that's some of the freedom that you actually refer to when you think about the United States, although Americans don't think about it that way. A lot of it does boil down to that, the fact that it's a big enough country and it is set up politically and the mindset is such that people are not reliant on one another to the extent that they are in Europe and especially Sweden. Now we're going to talk about the cons. One of the big cons regarding the United States is the formality of American leaderships, especially at places of employment. Americans today exercise what we, in my leadership studies at school, for instance, would refer to as positional power. Positional power is actually one of the weakest forms of power. They very oftentimes want to be treated in such a way that Swedes may think is beyond what they deserve. What I'm talking about here is the idea that someone should be respected or thought of highly or listened to just because of the position that they're in. Whether they're a boss at work or a parent or a doctor or any number of different things. Swedes really judge one another based on their merit and their level of education and their abilities. Whereas in the United States, it's not really that way, unfortunately. People kind of demand respect and to be listened to just because they're in a position of power. And as we all know, that doesn't work out for very long. The second the followers understand that the leader is not all that he or she is cracked up to be, they stop following immediately. Moving on, getting to the heart of one of the big Swedish complaints about the United States. That is that it's hard for Swedes to make friends here in the US. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that the reason that Swedes and Americans are not friends when they're not friends is primarily because of Americans and not Swedes. I know that's an unpopular opinion, but let me explain. Americans value very highly confidence, being assertive, and having a can-do attitude. And they're constantly on the lookout for those qualities in other people. And if you don't have them, unfortunately, they will oftentimes immediately shut down whatever is going on between you two. That's unfortunate because Swedes don't typically exude those qualities like Americans do. And that's unfortunate because nonetheless, Swedes still have a lot to offer Americans and vice versa. One of the things that Swedes are going to have a very, very difficult time with, or do have a very difficult time with in the United States, is one-upping. Americans are obsessed with one-upping one another in the same way that Swedes are obsessed with equality or equating one another. They are constantly wanting to be a little bit better than the next guy. And that will be exceptionally difficult for Swedes to manage. All in all, I think Swedes and Americans go very well together if they can acknowledge their need for one another.